So imagine a country injecting €500 billion directly into its economy, like right now.
Right, which is just a massive amount of money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, by all conventional logic, a fiscal stimulus of that magnitude should mean the citizens are they're thriving, right?
Oh,
The industrial engine is humming, and that prosperity just kind of trickles all the way down to the household level.
yeah, you would think. That's the classic economic playbook.
But the data we're looking at today tells a completely different story. We're seeing that nearly 2 million university graduates in Germany are currently staring down the barrel of relative poverty.
It really is a stunning paradox. I mean, you have one of the world's most advanced economic powerhouses fundamentally breaking the rules we all thought we understood.
Right.
We've been operating for decades on this assumption that, macroeconomic wealth and a higher education, that's your ultimate safeguard against financial ruin.
Yeah, you get a degree, you're safe. But today's deep dive is all about understanding why that ultimate economic safety net is, well, it's breaking.
And we have a really fascinating stack of sources to unpack today for you. We're pulling from the European Commission's Autumn 2025 economic forecast for Germany.
Essential reading for this, yeah.
Absolutely. We've also got recent poverty statistics straight from the German Federal Statistical Office, Destatis, along with some ground-level reporting from the SADA and Anadolu agencies.
Plus some foundational models on income distribution just to ground it all.
Right, because the goal here isn't just to throw statistics at you. We want to connect the dots between these sweeping macro-level government policies and the micro-level realities of everyday people.
Exactly. We need to figure out how poverty is actually calculated in such a wealthy nation.
Yeah.
And, explore why doing everything society tells you to do, like getting a university degree, is just not guaranteeing financial security anymore.
So to understand the mechanics of this crisis, we really have to start at the top.
A macro picture.
Right, the overall health of the German macroeconomic engine. Because according to the EC's Autumn 2025 forecast, the economy has been on a seriously rocky ride since the COVID-19 pandemic.
And when we say rocky, we're talking about historic levels of stagnation.
Stagnation is definitely the operative word here. Just to put it into perspective, Germany's real GDP in 2024 was essentially still sitting right at its 2019 level.
Wow. So that is literally a lost half-decade of growth, 5 years, with zero real economic expansion.
Yeah, it's actually one of the weakest recoveries among all the advanced economies, and to understand why, you have to look at Germany's structural DNA.
Right. They make things and sell them abroad.
Exactly. It's an economy historically built on, and you could say addicted to, exports. But they've been steadily losing market share.
Particularly to China, right.
Yeah, China's a huge factor. By the end of 2024, German exports had actually fallen by 2.1%.
But wait, the data also showed this massive spike in exports in early 2025. I mean, on paper, it looked like a sudden recovery.
Oh, yeah, but that was essentially a mirage. It was driven entirely by geopolitical anxiety.
Like a panic response.
Exactly. It's the supply chain bullwhip effect in action. What happened in that first quarter of 2025 was this frantic front-loading of exports to the U.S.
Because German companies were freaking out about the impending announcement of new U.S. tariffs.
Right, so they shipped absolutely everything they could across the Atlantic before those tariffs actually took effect.
So they weren't generating new demand at all. They were just like borrowing demand from the future.
Precisely. And the bill for that borrowed demand came due almost immediately.
Let me guess. The second quarter dropped off a cliff.
It did. The front-loading effect vanished, the tariffs loomed closer, and exports dropped right back down. It's just been a total whiplash environment for the manufacturing sector.
Okay, so the German government looks at this lost half-decade. They see the export market fracturing, and they decide they have to intervene aggressively.
Very aggressively. In March 2025, the parliament adopted a massive fiscal policy reform.
Which is wild for Germany, for a country that is historically obsessed with balanced budgets, the whole, black zero policy. This was a seismic shift.
Absolutely. They created a 500 billion euro special fund dedicated strictly to infrastructure and climate investment.
€500 billion.
The sheer scale of that intervention really can't be overstated. They are intentionally taking on massive sovereign debt to try and shock the economy out of this coma.
And it wasn't just the fund, right? They also tweaked the fiscal rules.
Yeah, they exempted all defense spending above 1% of GDP from their strict national fiscal rules, and they loosened the spending leashes on the individual federal states.
I was thinking about this. And it's basically like trying to restart a stalled commercial airliner in midair.
That's a great way to put it.
The government is just dumping pure jet fuel into the engines. 500 billion euros. But the structural headwinds, the global tariffs, they're pushing right back.
And you can see that struggle in the projections. The EC shows the economy is still broadly stagnating through 2025, projecting just 0.2% growth.
Barely moving.
Right. They're hoping all this fiscal adrenaline leads to a rebound of 1.2% GDP growth in 2026 and 2027.
But that adrenaline comes at a steep cost to the national balance sheet, doesn't it?
Definitely. They're projecting the government deficit to hit 4% in 2026, and the overall debt ratio is expected to climb to 67% of GDP by 2027.
Okay, but here is where the math stops making sense to me, and where we kind of transition from those macro numbers to the micro reality.
Right, the ground level.
Yeah, because if the government is injecting hundreds of billions of euros into the system, why does the data from Destatis and the Anadolu agency say that 21.2% of the German population is currently facing poverty or social exclusion?
It's a huge disconnect.
It is. We're talking about 17.6 million people slipping backward while the government is supposedly, priming the pump.
So, to understand that disconnect, we really have to clarify what poverty actually means in the context of a highly developed European nation.
Because it's not what most people immediately picture.
Right. We aren't talking about the World Bank's definition of absolute poverty, which is, living on less than $1, 25 or $2 a day.
Yeah, absolute poverty is about basic survival. Caloric intake, literally having a roof over your head. But what Destatis is measuring here is relative poverty.
Exactly.
And relative poverty is fundamentally about your ability to participate in the society you live in. It measures the gap between the haves and the have-nots.
It's about being locked out of the baseline lifestyle of your peers.
Right. Rather, that means being unable to replace a broken refrigerator without falling into some spiral of high-interest debt, or just not being able to afford a surprise medical bill.
So the European Union defines the threshold for this relative poverty as earning less than 60% of the median income.
Okay, let's translate that percentage into actual euros for 2025 so people can picture it.
Good idea. So, for a single person living alone in Germany, falling below that 60% threshold means your net income is less than 1,446 euros per month.
Wow, okay. And what if you have a family?
If you are a family of 2 adults and 2 children, that line is drawn at 36 euros per month.
What I find fascinating and deeply concerning, honestly, is how that 60% line is a moving target.
Yeah, the math can be brutal.
Right, because if inflation drives up nominal wages for the upper middle class, the median income of the whole country goes up, and when the median goes up, the relative poverty line rises with it.
Exactly. You could be working the exact same job, earning the exact same wage you were 5 years ago, and suddenly find yourself swallowed by the relative poverty bracket.
Just because the rest of the economy accelerated without you.
And that mechanism really explains why the demographics of who is falling below that line are so heavily skewed. The Destatis data shows that the risk of poverty is hyper-dependent on your household structure and your connection to the labor market.
I imagine the unemployed are hit the hardest.
It's a staggering number. Unemployed individuals face a 64.9% risk of poverty.
64.9, which really highlights how punishing the German system can be if you lose your foothold in the workforce. But it's not just the unemployed, right?
No, it's not. Individuals living alone face a 30.9% risk, and single-parent households are looking at a 28.7% risk.
And we also have to look at the retirees.
Yes, the poverty risk for retirees is at 19.1%. Now, while that is slightly below the national average, the burden within that demographic is highly unequal.
Let me guess, a gender gap.
A massive one. Destatis data from 2021 revealed that women's retirement incomes averaged almost a third lower than men's.
A third lower. That is huge. And, we really shouldn't treat relative poverty as just some abstract statistical gap. The data shows severe, tangible consequences.
Oh, absolutely. Real human impacts.
We're looking at 10.5% of the population living in overcrowded dwellings. And in 2021, over 2.6 million people reported lacking the money to sufficiently heat their homes.
And when millions of people cannot afford basic modern living standards like heating, it signals a structural failure. It means a fifth of the population is participating in an economy that just doesn't generate enough value for them to comfortably survive within it.
Which brings us to what I think is the most counterintuitive part of our sources today. Because traditionally, if you wanted to avoid falling below that 60% median income line, society gave you a very clear playbook.
Right. Get an education.
Exactly. Go to university. Economic theory actually treats higher education as a merit good.
Yeah, let's define that mechanism for a second. A merit good is something that benefits both the individual and society as a whole. It generates positive externalities.
Like innovation and higher tax revenue.
Exactly. When a government subsidizes universities, they do it with the expectation that graduates will innovate, drive productivity, and expand the tax base. A degree has historically acted as this fiscal anchor.
Keeping you firmly planted in the middle class, regardless of economic turbulence. But the data coming from the SATA news agency shows that anchor is, well, it's dragging. By 2025, approximately 1.9 million people in Germany with higher educational qualifications are facing the risk of poverty.
1.9 million.
That includes university graduates, people from higher ed institutions, and vocational academies. And that is an increase of 350,000 highly educated people slipping toward the poverty line just since 2022.
The math behind this shift is really vital to understand. Between 2022 and 2025, the total pool of highly educated people in Germany expanded massively.
How massively?
It went from 19.41 million to over 21.04 million. But the labor market simply refused to absorb that new capacity into well-paying roles.
Which is reflected in the unemployment numbers for that group.
Exactly. The unemployment rate for this specifically academic demographic rose from 2.2% to 3.3%.
Okay, I have to push back on that logic for a second, though.
Sure.
Because the European Commission report specifically noted that 27% of German firms are reporting critical labor shortages right now.
That's true.
So if over a quarter of the economy is begging for workers, how is it mathematically possible that academic unemployment is rising and nearly 2 million graduates are facing poverty? Are we just producing the wrong kinds of graduates?
It's a great question, and it comes down to a profound structural mismatch. It's the difference between the skills the education system is producing and the skills a stagnating economy actually demands.
Okay, unpack that mismatch for me.
Well, the EC forecast notes that job losses in the traditional manufacturing sector are being offset by job gains in public services, like education and health. But transitioning between those sectors is incredibly difficult.
Right. I mean, a master's degree in mechanical engineering doesn't easily translate to filling a nursing shortage.
Precisely. And furthermore, in an environment of 0.2% growth, you see a lot of what economists call labor hoarding.
Labor hoarding.
Yeah, companies might hold on to their existing cheaper labor out of fear of uncertainty, but they completely freeze the hiring of expensive, newly minted university graduates.
Makes sense.
That structural friction is exactly why the degree is failing as a safety net. The supply of academic credentials simply outpace the market's demand for that specific type of knowledge work.
And this raw data is already triggering fierce domestic debate, which we should touch on.
Oh, definitely.
Just to be clear, we are not taking political sides here. We are simply reporting the discourse. But Left Party leader Sarah Wagenknecht has pointed to this graduate poverty crisis as a systemic government failure.
Right. She stated that decline and poverty are now affecting all educational levels.
And regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, her comment highlights just how fragile the social contract has become. When the unspoken agreement, that studying hard guarantees financial security, when that starts to fray, it becomes a major societal flashpoint.
Because if the free market is structurally failing to equitably distribute income, even to the highly educated, it forces us to look at the mechanics of equity. We have to examine the tools the government uses to correct these market failures.
Right, and the ultimate scorecard economists use to measure the distribution of wealth is the Gini coefficient.
Yes, the Gini index.
It basically measures income inequality on a scale from 0 to 1. 0 represents perfect equality, meaning every single person earns the exact same amount.
And 1 represents total inequality, where a single person holds all the wealth.
Right, so to give that some context, Germany currently sits at a 0.27 on the Gini index.
Which is pretty good globally, right?
It is. It's vastly more equitable than a country like South Africa, which struggles with deep structural inequality at 0.65.
But they're still lagging behind highly equitable Nordic models, like Sweden, which sits at 0.23.
Exactly. So the obvious question is, how does a government manipulate that Gini coefficient? Like, how do they pull those 17.6 million people closer to the median?
Well, the primary levers are transfer payments and taxation. Transfers are direct interventions, things like unemployment benefits, housing subsidies, pensions.
But to fund those interventions, the government has to optimize its tax strategy. And the models we're looking at distinguish heavily between indirect regressive taxes and direct progressive taxes.
That distinction is crucial because they impact the population in entirely different ways. Let's look at indirect taxes first, like value-added tax or excise taxes on fuel and energy.
Those are inherently regressive, right?
Exactly, because they are a flat rate applied at the point of consumption, so they consume a much larger percentage of a low-income household's total budget compared to a wealthy household.
Right. So a government relying too heavily on regressive taxes will actively worsen its G&D coefficient.
Yes. Progressive direct taxes, on the other hand, scale with your income. The personal income tax brackets are designed so that the wealthiest individuals pay a higher marginal proportion of their earnings.
It's basically the most direct mathematical tool a government has for compressing the income gap and funding those social transfers.
And we can actually see Germany trying to manipulate these levers right now in the European Commission's 2026 projections. The government is planning an expansionary fiscal stance.
Meaning they're introducing new tax relief measures.
Right, which include higher deductions for firms to stimulate growth, alongside some alleviations for households.
They are also aggressively intervening in the labor market itself. They have planned a minimum wage increase of 8.5% in 2026, followed by another 5% hike in 2027.
And the stated goal there is to boost real wages, offset the purchasing power that was destroyed by inflation, and manually pull that bottom quartile of earners back above that 60% relative poverty line.
But, and there's a big but aggressive intervention, introduces the core tension of macroeconomic policy.
It always does.
Right. Because if you want to fund a 500 billion euro infrastructure fund while simultaneously pulling 17.6 million people out of poverty, the populist answer is always just tax the top brackets and the corporations much more progressively.
Just tax the rich.
Exactly. But doesn't leaning too hard on progressive taxation trigger what economists call allocative inefficiency?
It absolutely does. And that is the tightrope the German government is currently walking. Allocative inefficiency occurs when policy distorts the market so severely that resources are no longer put to their most productive use.
So if the marginal tax rate on high earners or corporations becomes too punitive, it actually alters their behavior.
Right. Highly skilled workers might choose to work fewer hours because, well, the extra income just isn't worth the tax burden.
Or corporations facing massive Social Security contributions and corporate taxes might engage in capital flight, literally moving their operations across the border.
Or they might simply automate roles rather than hire new workers.
Right. And if that happens, you completely derail the fragile 1.2% GDP growth that Germany is desperately banking on for 2026.
It's a catch-22. If the government leans too far into equity, they risk crushing efficiency and growth.
But if they lean too far into corporate growth and ignore the distribution of that wealth, they end up with the paradox we started with.
Exactly. Nearly 2 million highly educated citizens slipping into poverty. It is a wildly complex balancing act.
So let's pull all of these threads together for you. We started by looking at Germany's macroeconomic engine, which has essentially been stalled since 2019.
We saw how global tariff fears created this chaotic export roller coaster.
Which forced the government to bypass its own fiscal rules and dump a 500 billion euro stimulus into the economy just to project a really meager 1.2% growth rate.
But down on the ground, that macro stimulus just isn't reaching the people who need it most. Over 21% of the population is trapped below the 60% median income line.
And we've seen how relative poverty operates as this moving target, locking the unemployed single parents and a disproportionate number of female retirees out of basic modern living standards.
And perhaps most significantly, we explored the collapse of the ultimate economic safety net. The revelation that higher education is no longer a guaranteed shield against poverty.
Yeah, with nearly 2 million university graduates facing financial insecurity, we're witnessing a profound structural mismatch between the degrees being minted and the skills a stagnating, shifting economy actually values.
It really highlights the incredibly delicate balance governments must strike. They have to stimulate raw GDP growth and ensure that wealth is distributed equitably through taxes and transfers,
without breaking the incentives that drive the economy in the first place.
which leaves us with a critical, broader implication to consider.
Right. I want you to imagine dedicating years of your life to acquiring specialized knowledge. doing exactly what society asked of you, only to find that the economy simply doesn't value that knowledge enough to keep you above the poverty line.
It's a terrifying thought.
It is. Because we are standing on the precipice of an era defined by artificial intelligence and rapid automation. These technologies are explicitly designed to replicate and potentially devalue traditional knowledge work, the exact cognitive labor that university graduates have historically monopolized.
And if a premier industrial and educational powerhouse like Germany is already failing to absorb its academic workforce, it suggests a much deeper structural shift is underway.
It really makes you wonder if the German graduate poverty crisis isn't just an isolated local anomaly caused by a stagnant decade.
Maybe it's not.
Right. Perhaps it is canary in the coal mine for the global economy. It's a warning signal that the fundamental social contract, the promise that a university degree is an unbreakable ticket to the middle class, is quietly expiring. And as AI accelerates, that is a reality the global workforce is going to have to confront.